We begin tonight's challenging conversation, standing up, reclaiming lay leadership in the Catholic Church, in the Catholic sector. And tonight, we're honoured and delighted that Francis Sullivan and Geraldine Doogue agreed to stand up themselves and talk about why they stay in the Church and how we, lay people, might take back our sense of church and live our gospel values a bit more out there. I know for the average St Vincent de Paul Society member, hiding your light under a bushel has been the way it's been for 186 years, I actually think. But that's not the future. We have to shine our light, as Kevin keeps telling us. So this is the call for us as individuals and as faith-based organisations. So our conversationalists. Francis Sullivan, as you know, most recently was the CEO of the Truth, Justice and Healing Council, the Catholic Church's response to the Royal Commission. And in 5 years, Francis heard, saw and felt much beyond our ken. And he left with a blunt message for the Church. You've got to change your practices. But prior to that, Francis was the Secretary-General of the AMA, the Australian Medical Association, following 14 years as CEO of Catholic Health Australia, representing all the churches, public and private hospitals, and over 500 aged care services across Australia. And it was announced this month that Francis had been appointed the founding chair of One Martyr, charged with uniting the group of martyr hospitals in Queensland. Francis remains a loyal and committed Catholic, and I hope tonight he might enlighten us on how he and other non-clerical Catholics can lead us and help us be visible and proud of being Catholic and of being Catholic organisations. Now, Geraldine Doogue is well known and well loved for her enthusiastic, well-researched and loving curiosity of all topics. Geraldine has a commanding on-air presence in both radio and television and is a much-loved broadcaster. From Four Corners to Compass, Life Matters, Saturday Extra on ABC Radio, she's accompanied us on our journey and she shared hers with us. Geraldine has never shied away from tough questions. Among the many awards Geraldine has received is a UN Media Peace Prize for her work in the Gulf War. And last year she was inducted into the Australian Media Hall of Fame, and of course she is a proud Order of Australia recipient. And Geraldine has also never shied away from her beliefs, her Catholic beliefs and her Catholic faith. And I think it's fair to say that as a practising Catholic, she is committed to seeing her church survive and thrive. Please join me as Francis and Geraldine come to the podium and begin their conversation about standing up and reclaiming lay leadership in the Catholic sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Julie. And in fact, one of the ways I said to Francis, who was wondering what it would mean to stand up here, and I said, now don't take these people lightly. They're a very serious bunch. I said they really, they care about their commitment and their organisation and their church really do, more than a lot of organisations that I've gone to. So it's a great pleasure to be invited back, and I fully expect to be engaged in some ways in some good argy-bargy with you after we've both said our piece. And I'll just watch my time because, look, it's a big ask that Julie has made of me. I've just been away for a month on long service leave, and I deliberately lived in the moment. I went to Russia. I had a most fabulous time, and to see my daughter in Beirut. She lives there with her husband, who's the ABC correspondent, and relatives in Ireland, and I just let it all wash over me, really. I didn't do my usual sort of what is all of this mean. I just lived it because it was such an extraordinary, wonderful trip. And of course, to see the UK, my beloved UK, in such an extraordinary mess, and to watch Boris, sort of coming to realise that I sort of said to people, you don't think that the essential conservatism of the Tory member might cut to, and they'd stop and say, no, forget it. Because I thought maybe Jeremy Hunt, might come through, the Foreign Secretary, former head of Charterhouse. They're all it's a very small pool of talent. It's a real warning about small pools of talent running places. No, they said it's Boris. So, and here we have today, it is Boris. And as somebody said, let the games begin. And I'm getting ready, I can tell you, for some extraordinary coverage of Boris. So look, it's pretty bracing to be in the Northern Hemisphere at the moment. To be honest, we wonder about things down here and how good is Australia and so on, but really it does seem things are more fixable. I honestly did feel after being there in the Northern Hemisphere, and I did really ask myself, when I did allow myself a little bit of depth thinking, because it was such a good time, where does the church sit in all of this? There's so many questions, so many wicked problems, so much this sense of what comes next, just will the centre hold? My goodness, the W.B. Yeats question was very vivid there. So I'm going to come to this, what I left me with. I did ask myself, is there any room still for a developed interior life? What is the discipline required? And that word discipline hit me in the face. Who has it, I ask myself. I do believe that for those of us who do choose to maybe think about standing up as a member of the church, I do believe the next set of elites will be those who can focus and who can somehow cut through the extraordinary input and over-sensory input that proliferates at the moment. And I found myself collecting, as I do, writings and observations and insights from various writers because they help me when I'm not feeling particularly wise, and I intend to share them with you now. A letter in the Financial Times struck me, following a particular article about the accelerating pace of digital technology. It was from Brendan Kelly, a professor of psychiatry at Trinity College in London, and Trinity College in Dublin, what am I saying? And it was just, I think, a very pertinent thing to be reminded of. These worries, he's talking about the turbulence of modern life, were ever thus. In 1875, James Foulis Duncan, an outspoken Irish asylum doctor, warned the Medico-Psychological Association in his presidential address that, quotes, "A striking feature of the present age is that it is one of incessant mental activity. All is hurry, bustle and excitement." Duncan felt there was an amount of brain work going on in the present age far different in kind from and far greater in degree than any known before. Previous people had, quotes, "none of that feeling of discontent with present things, which lies at the basis of all improvements." This was 1875. Change was not, however, intrinsically good or bad. Change is inevitable, and we need to negotiate it mindfully rather than rail against it. Duncan knew this, said Brendan Kelly, more than a century ago. We can no more change the mechanical and commercial character of the age than we can arrest the sun in its course or put back the hands upon the dial plate of time. Nor, even if it were possible the world to return to the condition it was a century ago, would any of us be willing to give up the advantages of our present state to secure such a result. Now look, I think that's right. Then I read Father Frank Brennan speaking to concerned Catholics in Canberra at their meeting in Goulburn last month, posing himself the question that must be on many minds tonight, and really Claire has put it beautifully. Why bother with the church, given all the obvious and less obvious failures? Here was his final par. Those of us who remain Catholic and who espouse our faith, our doctrine and our practice as a commendable way of life do so because we just don't see how we can live a complete life on our own, following our own star, unaccompanied by the community of saints who went before, and unaccompanied by the community of believers with us now. Gifted with the tradition and the authority of the Church, we believe we can be more attentive to all possibilities and more attuned to truth and to the poor. We see the value in being on a ship, and especially a ship with its own museum. A museum can be a very educative place, but you don't look to the museum as the place from which to steer the ship, or the cabin, or as the cabin in which to abide for the course of the journey. Beautiful analogies, I think. Then a final one I offer you from a Jesuit, Monsignor Roderick Strange, Professor of Theology at St Mary's University in Twickenham, in one of the several regular columns offered in that very secular place, the UK, to ministers of religion. Quite struck me, actually. And the BBC has thought for the day. I thought, imagine trying to introduce that to the ABC at the moment. And of course, they practice, and they're good. They're quite good at it, dare I say. And it really quite took me back. Anyway, he had noted that a very good parishioner, a good businessman accustomed to decision-making, spoke to him recently with relaxed good humour, essentially saying to Monsignor Strange, look, don't you worry, just get on with it and lead us and we'll follow. And it caused this ageing priest, he thought he was offering the ageing priest something, it caused this ageing priest to reflect on the different interpretations of the word authority in the Church. The noun authority, as a good Jesuit said, had two interpretations. The noun, he suggested, authoritarian, those who imposed their will come what may, and authoritative, not exercised by external imposition and forceful power, but by a quality that came from within, by the sort of behaviour that simply seems the real thing, whether it's from a sermon or whether it's interpersonal dealings. What is authoritative, he said, rings true. It comes from the heart and it touches the hearts of others. So, where do we place ourselves in all this? As Catholics, do we stand up? Do we decide it's all too hard and that it just can't compete with other draws on time? Do we run like the Social Democrats in Germany in the 30s? Do you remember last time I was here I spoke about that amazing conclusions that those young Germans were coming to about the folly of big words? My God, I know they're looking at Boris at the moment and being Benny big offerings. They were very, very wary. No, we don't run, I think. I think that's one of the great lessons of the 20th century, is the way the Social Democrats in Germany ran away and vacated the field and left a vacuum in which very unpleasant forces can reside. Somehow, we have to dig deep and ask ourselves some big questions about what this tradition has really meant to us. Truly we do. How much we want to see it viable for the future, humbly knowing that lots of this is out of our immediate control. You've got to know that. Room has to be left for the Holy Spirit, as it was on Pentecost Sunday. You've got to know that as well. It forces one to think about where a fragile church sits in the midst of all of this turmoil, simultaneously wondering whether its fragility is a leading cause of it. I think it is, but it's no use wringing one's hands about it. It just simply is there. And I very much like Pope Francis's call about being a triage hospital on the edge of a battlefield. I really love that, and it quite fortifies me. But could it be that the Church is being asked right now, I wonder, to pose the right questions as opposed to offering neat right answers, whatever the heck they are? To develop a reputation for re-emphasising the skill of examining our lives and surrounding culture for the virtues and vices of our time. To uncover, in language that matters to us, what may be hiding in plain sight. For instance, what does the parable of the talents imply to us? Truly, what is being asked of us and our talents, humble though they may be at the time? How do we divide our duties in an honourable way? Indeed, what does the word honour even mean these days? she says, looking for her final, here we are. What does it mean in our life? The word honour. Or, where do I see myself in the spectrum of God's creatures? When you do this to the least of my little ones, you do it to me, which actually animates all of you, I know. But are the little ones necessarily those whom I think they are? Might they be the neglected, overlooked, prosperous child, terribly disconnected from a sense of the future, as one definitely does see, as much as the poorer child from a stronger grouping, but from a school with poorer educational outcomes? What does humility mean in the 21st century? And why do I hear it used in the business world, true, much more than I hear it used in a lot of other places? These are conundrums. And to dare I paraphrase JFK, ask not what your church can do for you, but what you can do for your church. I do wonder whether this is what is being asked of us. Might it mean posing questions like, where do I see kindness and generosity? And be prepared to see it where you might least expect to see it. Because I certainly do in my media role. And it moves inexorably towards leadership, of course. I fully understand that. This rolls off the tongue and says, oh, well, of course, there's a lack of leadership. The notion that all can be saved with good leadership. But the idea that they're going to be overt saints is something I really wrestle with. Some of the best overviews of leadership down through the centuries emphasise the need for certainly integrity, yes, to the core task at hand, something that requires a commitment of mind, body and soul. But the good leader has to, or the experience has shown, they have to demonstrate wiliness. A word many people are very uncomfortable with because they think it suggests nefariousness. Whereas I think increasingly it relates to a sort of adaptability that John Maynard Keynes, the great economist, and the great answer that he gave at when he was discussing Bretton Woods to somebody, when circumstances change, sir, I change my mind. What do you do? So, what I personally look for in leaders and seek it in myself is suppleness, shrewdness and wisdom. They're the three words I really favour and sort of give value to. Not perfection. Don't let the best be the enemy of the good. Gosh, I really live by that these days. And maybe for final exhortation, we can take consolation, as I certainly do, from the great Irish playwright Samuel Beckett and his immortal invitation. Ever tried? Ever failed? No matter. Try again. Fail again. Fail better. Thank you.
Oh, thank you everybody for the invitation, and it's nice sitting here and just seeing a lot of familiar faces over the journey, as they now say, and in some ways it's a bit like deja vu for me, because I stopped in my role in August last year, and since then I've walked the Camino and I've had a holiday in France, and I've blissfully tried not to think about any of this sort of thing. So when I was asked to give this talk, I thought, I won't say exactly what I thought, but I did say, shit, what am I going to say? And and I went back to some of the things I'd read and written before and tried to relate to it. But I remembered early on, when I was asked to do the job about the sex abuse scandal, one of the archbishops said to me, eventually you'll fall into the wound. And it was almost like you're not meant to. Thomas Merton always said the contemplative life inevitably leads you to the wound. God always meets humankind in its brokenness. So if we spend our time avoiding the wound, we're missing the point. So I thought about that. The voices of those abused are actually our prophets. I wonder if we actually have listened, because our culture has deliberately hushed them. We have gone to great efforts to remove them. We thought we had, and then it all came tumbling down. And our wound has been exposed. So what is this thing, the wound? What is it saying to us? Heard from Claire, heard from Geraldine, you've heard from plenty of us, that, we've got this distinction between being a church and the institution in a way. Always like the idea of saying a church is a movement. And it doesn't take much to get passion for a movement. But there's been a lot of intellectual energy and emotional energy in trying to keep on putting air in the tyres of the institution. And the institution doesn't do it for us often, but the movement does it for us, because the movement is something deeper. There's something about the depth of that knowing. It's what people call truth. So it doesn't matter if it's a religious movement or something else. Like Geraldine said in one of those quotes, what is authentic. You know it. It's an intuitive thing. We all have it. You don't have to have a pointy hat to have it. So when the sex abuse scandal started to happen, for me personally, it was an awakening about responsibility. What does it mean to be responsible? The old term, the ability to respond. So what did I, as a Catholic, need to confront in myself? I had to ask myself, how often had I outsourced my responsibility as a Catholic to the institution? How often do I seek the hard answers to come from someone else? How often have I assumed that the truth lies elsewhere? In other words, was I prepared to be an adult? I did about 200 talks over the time to various people. Most never came back, but some here tonight have, and there is a doctor for them. The one thing that people used to say to me is, gosh, this is the first time as a church we've had the opportunity to talk about what happened. And I go, why is that? Why have we been so passive? Why are we so passive? What is it about our culture that we keep on outsourcing our responsibility to grow and to be adult in our faith? And what does it mean to be adult in our faith? It means to start finding the answers yourself. It means to be able to find language to articulate your truth yourself. It means to actually believe that your conscience is as important as anybody else's. It means that that decision you make is as authoritative as anybody else's. It means that we have to actually be mutual in our engagement with the institution. It means that we have to start saying back to our own faith community, let's get relevant. People aren't leaving the Catholic Church because of the sex abuse scandal. They leave it because it's irrelevant. Young people aren't leaving for the sex abuse scandal. They're leaving to find places where they can be vibrant and they can feel affirmed, where human nature is not demonised. They are going to places where they think, I can come alive. How come they've got to go somewhere to do yoga, not in their parish? Seriously. How come we have to start asking ourselves these questions time and again? And now we've got people here, with the exception of one person maybe, who is over 60. I love bringing the average age down, but I can't anymore. And why do we always go, oh, I'm worried about what will be left for my children? Well, forget the children. What about us? Can't we have a relevant church? Can't we have a vibrant one that relates to where we're at? Or do we still feel that the gig is about us having to fit into the box? Because when you start living like that, you have to slowly cut things off about your personality. Geraldine's right when they were saying leadership is about wisdom, but it's the wisdom that comes from a depth of knowing. That's one of the greatest things our faith tells us. It's about a depth of knowing. And then we actualise that in how we relate, and then we actualise that in how we organise ourselves. So you take someone like the Vinnies, and they're out there in the streets. But like Francis says, he prefers the church to be messy, smelly, in places of conflict, both out there but within itself, I think. So conflict at the moment in our church is actually a positive. It means we're waking up. It means we've fallen finally into the wound. It means our contemplative place is drawing attention to something deep. It means that the people that are have been abused, but also the ones that are still being abused in the way we use the pathology of power in our church, have to be listened to. I'm over waiting. I'm over rationalising why things can't change. I'm over trying to find a legitimate reason why I have to somehow suffer incompetency. The sex abuse scandal, the biggest finding at the Royal Commission was the lack of moral leadership in the church leadership. Don't worry about who it is. And one of the greatest gifts of God is character in individuals. And I keep saying to you, what my experience was, are you going to stand up inside yourself, Francis? Are you going to actually become what you're meant to be? Thanks.
So, Francis, what's the answer?
I think the first thing is to learn not to shrink in yourself. And by that I mean, we often find we are too submissive and permissive and passive as Catholics. I don't accept that some of the things, for example, the bishops say are the state of play, have to be the state of play. I do not know why we can't have women deacons. I do not know why. The only thing I can find the only reason why I think we can't have deacons, women deacons, is our bishops won't advance the conversation. I don't know why we can't have a more inclusive approach to people of same-sex attraction. Don't ever tell me that the Catholic Church ran a non-discriminatory campaign over same-sex marriage. The messaging was very dog-whistled. So I'm just simply saying that we've got to learn not to shrink.
I think you're right. I mean, of course you're right. But I have to say, I'm sick of worrying about the bishops and allowing them to occupy my mind and rob me of oxygen. You know, like it's sort of the way I've been thinking, and because I wasn't nearly as close as you were. In fact, I wasn't anything like as close as you were, and so you had to go through all of that. But I did a spirituality in the pub at Jamboree a week and a bit ago. And we were talking about precisely this and some of the rulings that are sort of, you know, stun one. And I said to this big group, I said, you know, I'm trying to imagine institutions that are set up completely separately and invite the bishops to join us. Like I'm sick of, and I saw the look, like on their face as the people started to grasp what I was really saying. And now, because I fundamentally believe the secular world that I live in, I straddle both, has got all sorts of utter virtues and kindness and generosity, that's what I said in my thing, that I want to offer back from institutions that are set up from non-shrinking people, but not in a sort of a challenge. Well, I don't think it's worth, equally I think it robs one of energy to sort of say, well, cop this, you know, Bishop, you know, look, I'm not interested in that. I just can't be bothered. But I want to see a viable set of separate institutions that we don't even know yet exist, where, in a way, the bishops come to see what very good custodians of the church we will be. That we've got to believe it ourselves, and then we've got to raise the money to do it, and we've got to go through all the business of setting that up. Now, that's what occupies me, strangely enough.
Well, I hear that, and I think, you know, let's think about this for a minute. A couple of times some bishops said to me over the course of the last 5 or 6 years, "Oh, I'm a bit worried about some of the things you've been saying." I said, "Well, that's a relief. I thought it was everything." I said, I said, "Well, which bit in particular?" "Your Grace." "Well, Francis, I don't like this idea about a non-episcopal-led church." And I went, "Where have I said that?" I said, "I'm 60. This is back then. I ain't got time for a non-episcopal-led church. But I think bishops and lay people should stand together, shoulder to shoulder, and look in the same direction." It's a bit like you're saying. And secondly, it might be news to you, Your Grace, but a lot of the real oomph of the Catholic Church is already lay-led. We're already there, pal. Let's learn. And then hopefully that's what's going to happen when they do the governance review, that they'll actually see that where lay people can actually get it sorted. And actually we do things well. We do it more than well. we make it sustainable, and we make it relevant, we make it sort of obvious for people and comfortable to be part of. These are important things.
And it grows the corpus, to use the term. You know, I quoted to them, and I've said this, I think, before. I always look at it as a very interesting little example. The Lowy Institute for International Affairs, which is situated in Sydney, which was set up by Frank Lowy, pledging 30 million, this is what I'm talking, there's big money involved in these things over a period of time, to basically set up an area, a group that was separate to Department of Foreign Affairs. Foreign Affairs owned everything to do with Australia's place in the world. You think, when we were all growing up, it was Department of Foreign Affairs. I mean, if they ever spoke, you know, it was the foreign minister, and there was this sort of cast of, you know, luminaries and very much an elite cast within the public service. And in comes Frank Lowy, looking at think tanks elsewhere around the world, and says, we've got to develop a broader repertoire of people with knowledge of Australia's place in the world who are comfortable with speaking about it and meeting and having their own views. And, you know, that's what, 12 years old now, that place? And they started off with all manner, you know, they were very good at grooming young people, offering all sorts of commissions for works. They had Wednesday luncheons where people would come in and everybody was invited in to have, you know, a sandwich and so on. And gradually, I would argue now, because this is what I work on for Saturday Extra, there's a vastly greater number of people who are comfortable with their knowledge of this area, which, you know, used to be populated by boffins or with doctorates, and you didn't feel you had a right to sort of speak. Now, that to me is an example of a value add for Australia. Those people, and I mean, I'm one of them, but there's lots of them, they're skilling themselves up, they're constantly working to improve, to contribute in all manner of ways. They've gone far beyond where they were. Now, I think that's on offer. That's what I think is on offer. And sort of, we've got to dream big, in my opinion. We've got to think in ways that come from our world. If we've seen it and noticed how good it is, we've got to think, instead of saying, oh, well, of course, that's ridiculous, you know, how absurd that you be thinking like that. No, think like it and work out what needs to happen. Who are the project managers? This is how I think, whom you need to get on board. Who are the philanthropists? You know, there are a lot of people waiting to write big cheques, you know, if you know how to ask.
Well, I'll think of a way of asking.
Oh, well, good. Excellent. Excellent.
You know, the other interesting thing, though, we're at this moment, you know, the plenary council moment, you know. Now, I saw Massimo Fagioli. How do you like that? That accent. He wrote a good piece the other day, and basically he was arguing, you know, if you vacate the field, you leave it to the other side. Now, even though we don't like talking sides, but one of the things that just astounds me, and I think it has to be said louder and louder and louder to every bishop involved, is a really good signal would be to have a woman co-chair the plenary council. And I know one. And I'm serious though. I mean, why not, right? This is 2019. We are saying that we believe in mutuality in the church. And it just seems to me, can we not just have a little crack of hope inside the edifice around that whole clerical mindset? So next time you see your Archbishop, or you could lobby his Vicar General. Well, it's great to have him here, right? But I think we need to make this a KPI. It's so simple, but it's so important. And we're a church who believes in symbol.